Hi, so this is episode 3 with Jim Rothblatt. Hey, Jim.
Hi, Mike. Glad to be here.
Good, thanks. Yeah, so we're gonna talk. You've told me a bunch of stories, about Vietnam, a little bit about after Vietnam, but we're gonna go into more detail about, how you dealt with things after Vietnam. So go ahead.
All right. Like I said, feel free to interrupt. You know, I'm 77 years old, and I was only in a combat situation in Vietnam for 8 months of that of my whole life. But I've been back from Vietnam. Well, I've been back from Vietnam for 53 years, and out of the army for 52. And Vietnam has still been kind of an essential part of that. uh, about making me who I am. It's like everything I think that I've learned of value, I kind of bounce off of my Vietnam experience. And I'm sort of embarrassed to say that because that 8 months could impact my life so much. You'd think I'd be healthier individual to just move on like many people have. But you've given me an opportunity with these interviews uh, because I've been in a number of other interviews, and what you offer is that you've got kind of a Rogerian attitude about it. You're willing to let the interview go where the person wants to take it, rather than being so much question driven, which sometimes takes an interviewee in directions that aren't necessarily of the strongest interest to them. And I didn't know that, that what I would like to go after would be these years after Vietnam. So I appreciate the opportunity to
But I have a
start
question.
there.
I have a question, Jim. I,
Sure.
I don't understand the statement you just made about okay, you were only there for 8 months, but and people have let it go. I don't believe that's true. I would think it's had a great impact on everybody who was in that.
Well, I believe that also, but I've been involved with a lot of veterans over the years, and some seem to be able to compartmentalize
Hmm.
things better than I've been able to, and I don't really believe 100% that they're beyond it because I usually can see, it might be that I'm overly sensitive, but I can see where they have been impacted, even if they can't, even if I've only just met them.
Yeah.
Just their resistance
Okay.
is almost enough to satisfy me that, yeah, it's more than they're saying it is.
Yeah.
But I'm willing to give them that. I'm not trying to pry anyone's stuff out of them. I'm just, on my own journey here. And sometimes my path crosses with other Vietnam vets who interest me greatly because they help me understand my own experience.
Wow. Okay. All right. So go ahead. Let's talk about your journey after.
Okay, so I'm going to start it off in 1968, shortly after I got out of the Army. Like Lee, I got an early out to go back to school. So I only needed 24 units. Well, I only needed 6 units to get my bachelor's degree when I dropped out of school and joined the Army. But I had a GPA that was under a 2 point, which I had to get up to 2 point before they would give me my degree.
Yeah.
So I had to earn 24. I had to earn 24 units of A's and B's beyond my graduation requirements to get my GPA up to a 2 point. So I'm not bragging when I say this, but I don't believe there's anyone out there that holds a bachelor's degree that has a lower GPA than I do as an undergraduate. They, if the university issued them that degree, then they shouldn't have. So I've got like a 2.000 GPA as an undergraduate. So anyway, I did go back to school and I did earn my degree, but what the 6 units that I needed were called the senior project. I had to do a research project in my field, which was biology at the time. So just being out of the Army and impacted by Vietnam as I was, though I didn't really realize it at the time, because I was so happy to be home, I the only research project I could come up with was kind of out of the box, as one might say, for a biology project. And so the title of my project was Observations on a Most Successful Species. And basically, I wrote as if I was a field observer of of humanity, you know. So wasn't exactly the standard fare for a research project in biology. So what it involved, I was living in Long Beach at the time, going to Cal Poly in Pomona. And after I'd finished my A's and B's to where I got my GPA up to 2 point, I was left with this senior project. So I did a lot of reading, a lot of philosophies, a lot of biologists, anthropologists, all that kind of stuff. Lauren Isley was the prime mover for me when I discovered him. Uh, anyway, I lived in Belmont Shore in Long Beach, right across the street from the harbor. Uh, and so I'd go, it was spring um, quarter, and I would go out onto the beach, and in the way I tacked this was 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I would do my research and my writing and all that. So I'd go out on the beach and do my reading and writing. And when I first started, there was this guy that used to come walking up the beach, and somehow, would walk by me, and somehow we did the hi, hello, what's up? And it turns out he was a Vietnam vet medic just back from Vietnam. So we'd wind up sitting on my blanket discussing Vietnam and what it was like to be back each day that he came by. And we made it, I think both of us, without talking about it, made an effort to never introduce ourselves. I never learned his name. He never learned my name. I don't know where he was from. I don't know anything about him other than the time we spent together sitting on the blanket at the beach, and likewise with him. So he just disappeared into my past. But that's just kind of an interesting place that I began this conversation. So anyway, I wrote up my senior project, which didn't go over well with my advisor. He wound up throwing it at me and quitting as my advisor. So I had invested like 6 months into this project, and my advisor quit. And I was like, hadn't even back to zero. So I wound up fighting with the school for a while, going down there once a week, going, look, somebody's going to take this on. So the administration at the school finally said, okay, here's the agreement. I'm going to give it to the head of the philosophy department. And if he puts a check on it saying that it's makes sense, that it's logical, and that it fits what I'm saying in that, then they'll give me a passing grade on the project, meaning a C. No one gets a C. Here's another C I got. And then you can present it to your department, which is what happened. And I finally got my degree 10 years after I started, with a 3-year interruption in the Army. So that was the first part of it. Then shortly after, I moved to Palm Springs. And when I got to Palm Springs, which I never meant to stay, this was about 1970, I got to wanting to talk to a vet again. So I wound up calling every American Legion post and every Veterans of Foreign Wars post in the desert, asking if they knew of a Vietnam vet I could talk to. And none of them did. The war was still going on. It had been going on for 5 years at this point. And for these military, veteran posts, not to even know a Vietnam vet and not say, well, you're a veteran, why don't you come in and come meet with us? And they never did that, never invited me to come in. So I developed an attitude. So then moving on, in 1983, I read that in the local paper that there was a vet center opening up in Riverside to talk to Vietnam vets. So I went down to Riverside and said, hey, I want to talk to someone about Vietnam. And they sent me back to talk to this counselor. And when he found out I had a degree in psychology, he got all excited and goes, hey, I want you to show up at this group on Saturday. I go, well, that's kind of weird, but okay. So the group I went to was the board of Vietnam Veterans of America, the Riverside chapter. So they invited me to be a member, and they actually paid my dues. But that wasn't what I was looking for, so I never went back. Then in 1984, around Veterans Day, I read in the paper that they were doing a dedication of the statues at the National Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the wall, and that they were having reunions there. So I went back to go to the dedication of the statues and hung out with 100,000 Vietnam vets in Washington, D.C. for about 3 days and 3 nights, which was a fantastic, amazing experience for me, seeing the wall. Because the whole Vietnam experience was kind of surreal to me, but seeing the wall with the names of people that I knew on it kind of made it real for the first time, that I wasn't crazy, that it actually happened, so to speak.
Wait, what do you
And
mean? Wait, what do you mean made it real? I mean, okay, so it's 16 years after you've been home now?
17, yeah.
17 years you've been home and it wasn't real to you? I mean,
It wasn't real in the way you wake up you wake up from a dream that seemed so real while you were having it, and maybe a dream where you still remember pieces of it. That's what it was like for me. It was like, did I there were things I saw, or I think that I saw, or that I remember, that I think that I remember, that I don't think are possible. So my own belief system doesn't allow me to believe things that I saw with my own eyes or remember with my own memory. Though some of it's been validated by talking to guys like Lee that I served with and other people, but seeing the names on the wall
okay.
was validating.
Okay. That makes
I
sense.
mean, we're talking about my own sickness here. So you could do a psychological mental health assessment on me as we go through this remembrance as I remember it. So basically, I spent 3 days and 3 nights sitting above the memorial, watching people come and go. And it was the first place I ever heard "Welcome Home." It was actually from a black active duty Army captain. It said, "Welcome home, Doc." Just, I think he might have even hugged me. It brought joy to my heart. And said, and there were these reunions going on, so which was part of the reason I went. I was hoping I'd meet someone that I knew in Vietnam. So I went to the reunion, it was in this hotel, a hospitality room, and the guy running the reunion, he goes, and Jan Scruggs was in the same unit I was, the guy that was responsible for the wall. So he tells everyone, Jan Scruggs may show up here, don't take up all his time, don't swarm him, all that kind of stuff. Gives us this thing. So we're in there hanging out. I didn't see anyone I knew. And Jan Scruggs comes in and he's just kind of hanging out by the door. And no one gives a damn about him. I mean, really, it wasn't like no one was going to swarm him. It was like no one even talked to the guy.
Yeah.
So that was when I went over and introduced myself and we started our relationship, which was just, hey, how are you? I could thank him for all that kind of stuff. And we chatted it up a bit. So anyway, that sitting out at the wall is where I decided, well, I'm a counselor and I'm a veteran, so I think I'm going to get involved. And there's a lot of pain left over. That's where I saw 17 years later, people are bawling their eyes out. Vets as well as family members of people whose names are on the wall. It was like, God, I was struck by all the pain that was there. And I'm talking the pain, the war went on after I left for about 5 years of active war and then another 3 of kind of just not so active, but still going on. So there's still a lot of war left after I left. but I was sitting on the panels for 1967. So that was the pain I was seeing, the same stuff that I lived through basically. And so I went back to the vet center in Riverside when I got back and volunteered to work with them however they saw fit. And so for the first, I went down there once a week for a year and sat in on different groups, co-facilitated. They taught me how to do their rap groups. And,
Mm.
I was a facilitator, so I didn't get to tell my own story. I just got to listen to countless stories. And then they asked me if I would see if there was a need for counseling here in the Valley. I said, well, how am I supposed to do that? I think I told you this. That said, we'll start a chapter of Vietnam Veterans of America, which is what I did. And then I wound up being an officer in that nonprofit locally here and met a lot of vets, Vietnam vets coming through that way. In fact, we had a mailing list of over 400 local Vietnam vets at the time. And I also started doing clinical work out of Coachella Valley Counseling, doing PTSD assessments with Vietnam vets, well, all vets from other wars too, and their families, and running a lot of small groups. Again, I wasn't telling my own story. I'm just listening to other people's stories. I did that from 1984 to 1996, 12 years. When I quit it all, I quit being active with VVA. I quit doing the counseling. It just got to be too much for me. It was interfering. It was interfering with my mental health. I now know that I had what's, God, the term is escaping me at the moment, compassion fatigue. And I couldn't tell my own stories from the ones I was listening to anymore. It was like I was overwhelmed by the pain, basically. And I didn't really have anyone to share that with. So, and another good part of all that though was I was working in the schools, and a buddy of mine was a social studies teacher. And so in 1984, the same year, well, after 84, 84, 85 school year, he asked me if I'd come in and talk to his social studies classes when they were talking about the Vietnam era. And I said, well, I won't come in alone. And so by that time, I'd known a bunch of vets. So I started taking panels into classrooms. And I did that for the 12 years too, between 84 and 96. And that was an amazing experience. And in all kinds of ways, which is kind of, I still hear from some of those vets. When I was doing the vet counseling, I had one group, small group. I did individual and group therapy. And I had one therapy group that ran for 3 years. And I'm still in contact with some of those guys, the ones that are still alive anyway. And they don't contact each other, but they contact me and ask about each other, which is kind of an odd thing, but it is what it is.
I have a question. So I guess I don't understand why you weren't seeing a therapist during that time.
As soon as I quit, I started seeing therapists. I started going to VA counseling. I switched over from being a therapist to being a patient. So, because my whole life, I've always done everything backwards. So it's only fitting that that's how that would work. Though, of course, anyways, that was a journey. I did that off and on for years. Kind of watched the evolution of the way the VA handled PTSD therapy from the time I became a therapist working out of the vet centers to turning into a patient. And when I stopped doing my own therapy and assessment, the VA kind of moved into evidence-based treatments, and in schools was moving toward evidence-based processes and programs also. So it was supposedly it was the therapy was evolving, but in a lot of ways I saw it as devolving, but that's a whole other story too, particularly for treatment people. And it's only my opinion.
Oh, so how did, well, what grade were you seeing in school? Was it fourth graders, fifth graders?
Well, when I was a school counselor, I'd spent 10 years of my experience was as a middle school counselor at a couple of different schools, 6th through 8th grade. 9 years of my experience was at two different high, well, yeah, two different high schools, which was 9th through 12th grade. And then I did 7 years working out of the district office under a student assistance program. So I had 7 years of K through 12.
But when you did your presentations about Vietnam, was it
Oh, that was in junior 11th grade American Studies classes.
okay? So the kids are 16, 17, and
Yeah, they're basically 16, 17, and I would not take the panels in unless whoever whatever teachers were bringing students in. The typical setup was we'd schedule a day when I'd come over for the vet panels, and every period, all the American Studies classes that period, like all first period American Study classes, would come into the library, and then they'd ask questions of the vets. And the teachers had to have agreed before I would bring the panels in that they would spend a significant amount of their time actually talking about Vietnam era and how it impacted America. I didn't want any kids coming in cold to what was going on.
oh,
And the only thing I asked of the vets, and when I brought the vets in, I tried to have men and women. I tried to have all the different militaries represented: Navy, Army, Marines, Air Force. I tried to, even at a couple of times, had Vietnamese who had been in the Army or Republic of Vietnam show up. So I tried to have all different political, from the right to the left to the apolitical on the panels. So just to give you an idea, one of the conversations I had, there was a guy who's now dead. His name was Chuck Wilson. Great big guy, mountain man, big beard. He'd been an infantryman, then a sniper, and then a machine gunner on a chopper, but he was in Vietnam. And he was really right wing. He would have loved Trump, if he'd lived long enough to see Trump. But and he was a dental tech. Like if he these giant hands made these little things that go in your mouth. I just never could put that together, how that was even possible. But I remember calling him up one time and going, "Hey, Chuck, I need you for this panel discussion. I need a right-wing mountain man that likes to shoot things," which is kind of the truth, because that's what he would bring to the panels. So and an interesting part of those panels is I pretty much invited the same guys back every year, the same people. They didn't always shift it around. Some wouldn't come, some would, but in the beginning, when they first getting to know each other, there was a lot of arguing, where their belief systems were so different, the right and the left. And so the kids got to see that, and they answered the questions. And I'd moderate so it wouldn't get out of hand. In fact, one time I stopped them. I go, "Hey, stop, guys. These kids don't want to see some two old men slap fighting each other." And that just kind of broke the mood, and they got it. But over the course of years, these guys come showing up every year. They started coming together. There was a mutual respect where, it became different. But sometimes the teachers were Vietnam vets or had been draft dodgers or peace people. So they would enter into these discussions too that the students could see. So they were one-day events at each school once a year, usually in the month of May, because that's when the American Studies classes got up to the 60s and 70s, and they were rich. Some Dave Davis Hall, whose name I gave you, he told me it was the best thing that ever happened to him, going to being on those panels. So anyway, so there were the panels. And my work on one occasion I can't remember the year where it came, but I had a job in Washington, D.C. So I went back to when I was there, I made time to go visit the memorial. And I've got memorial stories. I've been there about 4 or 5 times, and there's magic that happens there. But anyway, I was in Washington, D.C. I visited the memorial, and I thought, heck, I'm going to go over to Jan Scruggs' office and see if I can see him, you know. So, and I had met him twice before that. Uh, Once when I was with VVA, there was a big parade in LA. And so our local chapter of VVA was going to be in that parade. And we were way at the end of the parade. So we're watching the parade. And at the beginning of the parade, here comes this big banner, 199th Flight Infantry, with about 6 guys. So, and it was right at the front of the parade. So I ran out there. I figured I'll walk in the parade twice. I'll go with the 199th, and then I'll go back at the end of the parade and walk with the chapter. And Jan Scruggs was one of those guys. The parade people had invited him to be there. So I was probably the second time I met him. And the third time I met him, he was doing some work out here in Palm Springs because he was a motivational speaker. Businesses would hire him and he'd come out. One man can make a difference, blah, 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 blah. So I took him hiking in the Indian Canyons. That was pretty cool. So that was another time, you know, real friend stuff, kind of stuff. So anyway, I'm back in Washington. Decided I'll go back by his office. So I walk into this big old building, you know, go up to where the headquarters of the National VVA is and say, hey, I'm here to see Jan Scruggs. No problem. Send me back there. So I'm sitting in his office, you know, in some office in Washington, D.C. And he invites me to this Teach Vietnam Teachers Conference that they're going to have in Washington, D.C., which I didn't know anything about, but which was great. So I wound up going. So this conference is like multi-days. They send you, they sent me like an honorarium before the thing even starts. I can't remember how much. And they supplied all the meals, room and board, gave all the breakout rooms. It was authors that had written books, and you got one of their books and you could get it autographed if you wanted to stand in line for that at the end of the workshops. So flying to Washington, D.C., room and board, I came home with more money than I went with. You know, it's like, what kind of conference has anyone ever been to that's like that? You know, I land in the airport, they got a sign, Jim Rothblatt. Then they drive me to where the conference is. Drive me, not just me, but everyone that was attending this thing. It was amazing. And then sometime after that, he invited me to go to a couple of meetings that took place in Pittsburgh. Never in my life did I think I'd ever go to Pittsburgh. I always pictured smokestacks and rust and steel, and you know, Pittsburgh's friggin' beautiful. You know, it's like the city of bridges. You know, it's sitting on this piece of land between two rivers, and amazing what I learned about Pittsburgh. But anyway, that was they were workshops made up of 40 participants, 20 Vietnam vets and 20 non-Vietnam vets, all of whom were teachers. I was the only non-teacher in the group, and they were teachers, high school and college level. And we were looking at a curriculum that had been developed around teaching the Vietnam era. And I've got a copy of that curriculum I'd be willing to give you if you like. It's pretty nice. I gave one to Lee because I had two for some reason. Anyway, so that was pretty beautiful. And everyone was supposed to do a teaching thing, you know, for the group, of show their best lesson. Of course, I'm the only guy there who wasn't a teacher. It's like, and they're videotaping the whole thing. They got two videographers there with their cameras, and the thing went on for days. So it was a big deal. So what am I going to do? I don't teach, but I do run groups. So what I wound up doing, I put the 20 guys, I don't think 20, I think about 10 of the guys that were willing, put them into a small group, like I would run groups, and then everyone else sitting in a room around. It's called the fishbowl. And then I just ran a group, which turned out it was probably because here's all these college educated guys with their shit together. Basically, they're all teachers, and you know, and what came up was survivor guilt. So every one of them was, and I didn't bring that subject up. It came up as part of their discussion. So what was so striking about it is every one of those guys had talked about their survivor guilt, except one guy who couldn't relate to it at all. And that guy's there in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the chest down. The one guy that didn't know anything about survivor guilt couldn't relate to all these other guys with survivor guilt, is paralyzed from his Vietnam trip. So if that wasn't enough to enhance everyone's survivor guilt, you know, then I don't know what would be. And the damnedest thing was the batteries on their cameras were gone, or something was happening where that's the only part of all those days that were not caught on videotape.
Oh,
Best Vietnam vet group I ever did. Thought it was taped and it wasn't. Killer. I'm still disappointed over that one. Anyway, so came back and went through different types of treatment modalities, both at the VA and the Palm Desert VA clinic. And over the course of time, I wrote down a lot of stuff. I sent you a couple of essays. I started writing those essays back in the 70s because I had these, were called intrusive thoughts. They're like dream sequences that I was having, only I was wide awake and I couldn't get them out of my head. So,
like what?
well, I've shared some, well, like one, you saw the ones I sent you. I think, did you read what I sent you?
Not, I haven't read everything yet.
Well, I didn't send you all that much, but anyway, so like the guy that was killed, the photographer story, that,
Yeah.
that was probably the first one I wrote down, you know, because that was one that went through my head. The stuff that Lee has talked to you about our April 23rd connection, that was one that just replay. Uh, my last day in the field when a friend of mine was murdered by an ARVN soldier.
Yeah.
That one was a big one. Um, just, and they would change, you know, like I'd sort of, okay, that one went away, but another one would pop up and be the reoccurring thing. And so then when I wrote them down and then stuck them in an envelope, that helped considerably. Uh, it didn't make them completely go away. And the part that bugged me about them all, they have, my memories are so clear about certain aspects of them, but have these holes where the pieces don't fit together neatly. And so I wanted to plug the holes like missing puzzle pieces so that, you know, I've been able to fill in a fair number of those pieces since I've reconnected with some of the people I served with. But mostly, I mean, here I am. It's all these years later. It's 2021, and I'm still talking about this stuff.
Well, I go back to what you said earlier, though, Jim. I mean, how old were you when you went to Vietnam? 22, 21?
I turned 20. I was 22 when I joined the Army. I turned 24 in Vietnam.
Had you ever traveled before?
Not really, no. No, that was my first big travel experience. You know,
Yeah.
I've been within our country. I've traveled. I mean, that's travel. I visited New York and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But, you know, not international kind of travel, no.
It's kind of interesting, though. So, it was the same for Lee. But, Lee said, I asked him about, so did you ever go back to Vietnam? He said, no. When I came home, I made a promise to myself, I'm not traveling again, which I thought was really interesting, whereas you and others, have gone back.
Yeah, I couldn't. I wanted to go back. In fact, I used to think while I was there that if the shooting would stop, I'll never go home. I mean, I felt like I was at war in the Garden of Eden. I
Hmm.
mean, I liked the people, I liked the food, I liked everything. It was beautiful. I, I like. I mean, I think I mentioned on one of the interviews you and I did about surround walking through the jungle. I mean, here we are, heavily armed. You know, we're looking ready to die, ready to kill, and you come into this clearing, and there's this little village. It's all peaceful looking with a pagoda and incense burning. You know, maybe temple bells ringing, and some old bearded Ho Chi Minh looking guy. You know, I mean, it was people with their out working the fields with water buffalo being led around by kids, you know, on carts and 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 here such a different culture, different languages, but I got was able to connect enough to some of the people, not very many, a few Arvin soldiers, a few like laundry kids or whatever, but enough to see that they could laugh at things that I thought was funny. You know, they could think was funny. I mean, that they could talk about hurt. One story I don't think that I shared with you that goes back, and I believe I shared about my friend being murdered by the Arvin,
Yeah.
but I don't know that what the finish of that was. It's like went back to base camp knowing I was safe, that I was not going to ever go back out to the field. I'm covered in blood, not my own. And I'm crying. God, I couldn't stop crying from the time I got on the helicopter to go back to away from the field till I got back to base camp and all this, kind of wrote my stuff up. And so I got back to my base and walked outside up against the concertina wire where there was a little village on the other side, and there was a little laundry girl. You know, she's probably about 12 years old on the other side of the concertina wire. So I'm standing on one side of the wire, she's standing on the other, and she indicated to me about the blood that I had on me. And she, her demeanor expressed such concern for me, you know, I was touched. You know, I mean, we've never seen each other before. She's just a little girl. I'm the heavily, you know, I'm the guy invading her country kind of thing, and that she was concerned about my welfare. You know, was so friggin' human. And and none of the people in my own base camp when I got back in my own medical platoon had a goddamn thing to say about what I'd just been through, even though they knew it. It's like, in fact, one of them said, "What are you crying for? You've seen men die before." You know, that played around in my head for a long time.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Can you you mentioned the word magic uh, when you visited the wall. Is that a spiritual kind of thing? I mean, was it remembering your friends who maybe passed away, or what? What was that? A feeling of community, connection?
Well, one of the good examples that comes to mind immediately is one I've already shared with you about the journalist that had come by with his class and then comes back alone and says that could have been me. And I told the story. It's like, wow. Or, just when the first time I went, when it felt real, you know, or when the black active duty army captain said, "Welcome home, Doc." You know, I mean, it's totally unexpected from out of nowhere, you know, or just I I actually, the times I went, I would hang around at the wall until something happened. The magic when I went with Lee was Lee's magic. For me, that wasn't magic. That was just another moment at the wall because I had some experience with it, but for him, that was his magic. Shoot, I worked in a school, in schools for 29 years. So asking a classroom of kids rather than, God, one at a time, you kidding me? I'm going to be here. I want to be here, but I don't want to be here snapping picture after picture for 20 pictures, So let's get this over in one shot, But that was Lee's magic.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah. Um, so it's been, I mean, yeah, more than 50 years for you since you've been home. Um, so do you feel any kind of, I mean, burden at all? Do you have this, you talked about survivor's guilt. Um, I mean, obviously it's had a great impact on your life. I mean, a major impact on your life, that experience in Vietnam. Um, how has it, as the years have gone by, has it become easier for you? I mean, it sounds like you've dealt with, Vietnam a lot more in your life and how it's impacted you.
Yeah, I pretty much embrace it now. Kind of, I've come to terms that it pretty much defines me,
Yeah.
and I'm not I'm not trying to get out of it anymore. I'm trying to embrace it. I don't know if you know who Baba Ramdas is. Was Roy Baba Ramdas, Roy Albert? He was a friend of Timothy Leary back in the old LSD days,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
so
Yeah.
he went to India, became an enlightened guy.
Yeah.
I went to see him speak once.
Huh.
He just wrote a book on aging because he was old, and so at the end of the Q&A, I asked him at the end. I go, well, now that you're an enlightened individual, does that mean you're all cured of all your neuroses and all that kind of stuff? And he says, no, not at all. He goes, but now when they show up, I just pat them on the head and and welcome them. And so that's kind of where it is.
Yeah. That's
You
what you,
know,
sure.
and one of the things that he had to say that still makes me smile is he became a writer. He's recognized as an enlightened, Eastern kind of philosopher guy. And he talked about when he get into his writing stage, he had to rent a cabin out in the woods with no TV because he could not write if he had a TV in his house. He, enlightened as he was, he'd put down the word processor and be watching YouTube or something.
Well, what is there anything else that you want to, tell us today? Obviously we can do more of these, but
Well, not really. Let me just give you for final deal.
okay.
One of the things when I started getting in touch with people I served with was through a unit message board, and so guys would get on there and we'd talk about all kinds of stuff, through the media, and so there, we got into political wars. So a few of us got censored off the message board because of our politics. We were too left leaning.
Hmm.
And so we wound up becoming, there were 8 of us. We wound up calling ourselves the Cyber Squad. So we remained in email contact. Well, there's only 3 of us left of the original 8 Cyber Squad. So we still share stuff now, mostly through messaging. I prefer to email, but we're doing this messaging and some Facebooking. Uh, but now with all the unrest that's going on politically, uh, you know, and something came up recently today on the politicking about Black Lives Matter kind of stuff. So the one guy, Steve, and we've only met once, the 3 of us in person ever. Uh, So Steve, who lives in Missouri, he talked about the first man he saw killed was a black man, and that the last words the guy said were "I'm hit," and he just put that down. It's just a reminder that black people died for our country, kind of thing. And so I was able to share, well, my first serious injury, that a casualty, was a black soldier who stepped on a mine and was blown into the air and lost his left leg below the knee. And and then I just finished it with BLM, exclamation point. And then John, guy who lives in Washington State, he just wrote "Amen to that, Jim." So I mean, it's yesterday. It's three of us impacted by three different experiences, but basically the same kind of stuff. Meeting today through through the media on current events, like how we're impacted exactly right now, when we see these guys playing soldier and taking over the Capitol, and it's it's just alive and well today. Can't take it out of us.
Yeah. Right, Jim. Well, thanks so much. And again, anytime, let's do more of these. It's really good.
All right. Well, I feel pretty much done. I appreciate the opportunity to do the aftermath kind of thing, to put it down. I don't know what your plans are for any of this, but I just like that it's out there, and it's kind of like putting it in the envelope, and I can let it go.
That's great. Thanks again, Jim.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Take care.